Good morning. You guys are going to have to just give me a minute to regroup. Because I love my sister. Wow, and I don't have to pray. Thank you, Betty. It was just one last thing. God is so good. And I just have to start with saying the women's ministry is fantastic. It's something that was put on Betty's heart, it's put on my heart. And just as a little segue coming into this, we spent the entire weekend at a retreat planning for the women's ministry and planning for the upcoming retreat that's coming. So we had a kind of pre-planning retreat that happened. And I'll tell you, God is so good because there were 13 women in one house with one bathroom. There were no accidents, there were no injuries, and everything was okay. So God is so good. So I just want to talk to you a little bit about my life back when I was 22. And I think this is so interesting because yesterday I just officially turned 44. So while this was a long time ago, it's still very relevant and it has a lot of purpose and power. And definitely I can see where God has brought me, and I hope through this testimony you guys can see maybe where you are in your life. So when I was 22, I had a 6-month-old child already, and I was heading out to my very first NBA basketball game. So maybe some of you have gone to an NBA basketball game, I don't know, but this was my very first game. So I was getting ready for the game, and I grabbed my good pair of Levi's out of the drawer, and put them on, and I got my crisp white V-neck t-shirt, the good one with no stains on it. And I just grabbed my old Timberland boots. Yes, out of the closet, we did that back then. And I put on my Timberland boots, and I got little Corey dressed, and I dressed him in a very similar fashion, because that's what we did back then. So I get in my car, it was a Honda, and I pull into the drive where they tell me to be, and this woman named Gracie, she comes out and she meets me and she introduces herself and asks me who I am and did all the logistics, and she hands me a laminated lanyard and tells me to walk with her down this tunnel. So I do, and I'm walking with her underground, under the arena, into this massive, massive tunnel. It's so big, buses can come through it. And as I'm walking, holding my little carry, I'm looking around, what in the world, what is this? I'm looking at news cameras, there's media, there's journalists, there are police officers, there's Secret Service, the really cool kind, like with this thing on, and they're looking around. It was amazing. And so, first I kind of thought, where am I? Does she know who I am? Because this is not where I think I'm supposed to be. I'm supposed to be watching a basketball game. So she leads me to these large open doors, these double doors, and she says, if you need anything else, let me know. And I said, okay, thanks. And I proceed to open these double doors. And to my surprise, I was in a palace. There was luxurious furniture, there was food, there was just, it was just beautifully decorated, it was amazing. And I'm standing there, and you see on TV the music just, that's exactly how I felt. I'm standing there in my Timberlands and my jeans and my baby on my little carrier, and I'm looking around at all of this stuff, and I see the women and the men. Now this lounge is called the Players Lounge. It's the room where all of the family and the wives of all of the NBA players are sort of housed, and we get to go hang out in this lounge until we want to go to the game, or if we want to skip the game, we can watch it on several TV monitors that are all around this room. But they were dressed, the women and the men were dressed as if they had just jumped off of a page in a magazine. So they were just dripping in diamonds. They had on their wonderful clothing. They had handbags I could not pronounce. They had heels on with their jeans. I didn't think that was a thing you did in fashion. And then the little kids were all running around, and the little kids were there. And they just looked like they jumped off of the page of Gap magazine. And I was like, oh, Corey, I'm so sorry. So I had no idea what I was getting myself into. So I'm going to get back to this story in a little while. But with that lifestyle, with that lifestyle, it just came a lot of stuff. So I had this lifestyle, I had a lot of things. I had, we had cars, we had Porsches, we had Ferraris, we lived in a mansion with an elevator, we had a house with a pool, we had all these things, we had all this stuff. And then, it's stuff. And I found myself getting more and more into the mindset of David's wife, Michal. And I didn't like it, but it took me a great process to figure out where I was going and what was happening in my life. So today we're going to be looking at 2 Samuel 6, and we're going to be looking at verses 12 through 23. But before we get started on that, I just want to give you a brief background of sort of what's happened in the Bible thus far. In 1 Samuel, we know that the ark has been captured, and it was captured before Saul began to reign in the days when Samuel was prophet. So we also know that the ark was captured by the Philistines. So we pick up where David is out to get the ark. He knows where it is, and he's going to bring the ark back to Jerusalem. So if you can look at now at passage 12. Now King David was told, "The Lord has blessed the household of Obed-Edom in everything he has, because of the ark of God." So David went to bring out the ark of God from the house of Obed-Edom to the city of David with rejoicing. When those who were carrying the ark of the Lord had taken 6 steps, he sacrificed a bull and a fattened calf. Wearing a linen tunic, David was dancing before the Lord with all his might. And I just want to pause right there for just a moment. David wearing a linen tunic was not at all an acceptable garment back then for a priest to be wearing. It was as if he were a commoner. So a linen tunic was worn by anybody who was engaged in a religious service. So David dancing in this linen tunic gave no significance of his status in the community. He was just a commoner. So reading on with 15. While he and all Israel were bringing up the ark of the Lord with shouts and sounds of trumpets. As the ark of the Lord was entering the city of David, Michal, daughter of Saul, watched from a window. And when she saw David leaping and dancing before the Lord, she despised him in her heart. They brought the ark of the Lord and set it in its place inside the tent that David had pitched for it. And David sacrificed burnt offerings and fellowship offerings before the Lord. After he had finished sacrificing the burnt offerings and fellowship offerings, he blessed the people in the name of the Lord Almighty. Then he gave a loaf of bread, a cake of dates, and a cake of raisins to each person in the whole crowd of Israelites, both men and women, and all of the people went to their homes. When David returned home to bless his household, Michal, daughter of Saul, came out to meet him and said, "How the king of Israel has distinguished himself today, going around half naked in full view of the slave girls of his servants, as any vulgar fellow would." David said to Michal, "It was before the Lord who chose me, rather than your father or anyone from his house, when he appointed me ruler over the Lord's people Israel. I will celebrate before the Lord. I will become even more undignified than this, and I will be humiliated in my own eyes. But by these slave girls you spoke of, I will be held in honor." And Michal, daughter of Saul, had no children to the day of her death. So now I want to look at a little compare and contrast between David's character and Michal's character. So we see David doing 3 things. He puts God first, he puts others first, and he was humble. And we see David's humility all throughout the Bible. So David puts God first in verse 17. We see David's very first act as king, the very first thing that he wants to do is return the ark back to its rightful place, back to Jerusalem. And he does this, and then he immediately, he makes sacrifices to God, immediately. And then we see David putting others first. The second thing David does, we see in verse 18, David offers the people a loaf of bread, a cake of dates, and a cake of raisins. And he does this, so it shows that David first and foremost takes care of the followers. He's taking care of the Lord's people first. As king, that's what he's doing. Even before he blesses his own household, he does this. And then we see that David was humble. In verse 14, like I said earlier, he was dancing around wearing a linen tunic. He was just dancing before the Lord, just unashamed, just praising and loving the Lord. So now let's take a look over at Michal. So let's see how she's looking over here. So we have Michal. Now remember, she's a princess. She's the daughter of Saul. So oftentimes Saul's characterized as being a little arrogant. So it's probably a fair assumption to say she might be a product of her environment. I mean, all of us are to some degree. So we see Michal as being arrogant. In verse 16, as the ark was entering the city, Michal watched from a window. So the ark was coming into Jerusalem, the very presence of the Lord was coming in, and she distanced herself from the entire event. So she was completely distracted. And then she was prideful. In verse 20, we see that she's embarrassed. She's embarrassed at how the king of Israel has been seen in front of all of the people. How he's distinguished himself dancing, as it says, half naked. And then she said, as if a vulgar fellow would. So this was not at all acceptable to her lifestyle. This was not at all acceptable to her status, or how she feels she should be represented. A king should represent himself. And then we see her as being selfish. So, in verse 20, we notice David comes home. He has accomplished his task. He has done what's rightfully to be done. He has brought the ark back to Jerusalem. And then when he comes home to talk and bless his household, the very first thing Michal does, the very first thing she does, is she addresses her concerns about how she looked. She addresses her concerns about her embarrassment, about how her husband looked in front of everybody else. So I also want to bring your attention to one more thing. In verse 23, it states that Michal had no children until she died. That's a really, really big deal. Okay, so we can assume one of two things. We can assume that after this whole conversation took place, that perhaps David didn't have relations with Michal anymore, and so therefore she had no children. Or secondly, we can definitely assume that God was very displeased with her behavior, and therefore she had no children. So now back to my story. I was living in a world of stuff, and I was looking for my identity in my things. And God puts a hole, I believe we're all kind of born with this longing and this desire and this hole in our heart, sort of like a donut. We got a heart with a hole in it. And the only person who can fill that heart, or fill your heart, is Jesus. Is the only one who can fill that hole in your heart. So I was looking for the cars, I was looking for the house, I was looking for the fancy shoes, the expensive bags, I was looking for the status, I was looking at the private planes, I was looking at all of this stuff to fill what I was still longing for, because I was still unhappy. The road led me to divorce. I had several consequences because of the actions that I chose that I later had to deal with. And God is faithful when He deals with us in our choices, and we do have consequences. His favor and His mercy. I am a testimony standing right here before you to tell you it is true and it is good. I was looking for my husband and my son to fill all these things, and I couldn't find it. I could never find it until God brought me to the frozen north, and He gripped my heart, and I encountered Jesus in such a way that I had never encountered Him before. And when that happens to you, you are freed. When that happens to you, something in you changes, and it changes forever. There's a piece of you that breaks off in a very good way, and you become whole, and you know who you are, and you know whose you are, and you know what God is going to do in your life, and you know that He'll never leave you, and He will never forsake you. So while I was doing all the shopping, and I was doing all the stuff, and I was over here lost, I had one foot in the world, and I kind of had one foot in the Word. Now, in my defense, I wasn't as awful as Michal. I mean, I wasn't a princess, and I didn't feel like the world owed me anything whatsoever. But I was lost, and I was searching. So when God gripped my heart, there's something that changes. You want to choose the Word, and you don't want to live in the world anymore. There's this old song that we would sing all the time back in our old church, and it says, "I've been changed." And it says, I've been changed, I've been set free, I've been healed, and I've been delivered. And if any of you can attest to having all of those or one of those things done in your life, you know that there's no way that you can go back to the way things used to be. And the chorus of the song says, I can't go back, I won't go back to the way it used to be. before his presence came and changed me. And you cannot go back. Thank you. Amen. I mean, some of us are still trying to figure it out, but when you're gripped by the Lord, you are moved, you are set free, you are changed, you are freed, and you can't go back. The things come against you, but you're created. I mean, we are a new creation in Christ. So I just want to look at that, and let's take a look at how we are today, like our next steps now. Let's look at how that looks for us. Are we over here like David? Or are we living our lives over here like Michal? On this side over here we have David, who's putting God first. So are we doing that? Are we doing that in our lives? Are we putting God first before our husbands, before our finances, before our education? Who's first in our life? It's time to do a heart check. Who's first? Are we putting others' needs first? Are we putting others before our own needs, our own joy, our own happiness? Are we humble? How humble are we really? I was just talking to someone who I absolutely love so much, and she is so near and dear to my heart, and she will always be for the rest of her life and the rest of mine. And we had this conversation about praise and about prayer. And it broke my heart in such a way, and I was driving and I couldn't cry, that she said, sometimes I'm in church and I want to praise, and sometimes I just want to fall on my knees, and I want to praise the Lord for how good he is to me and the things that he's brought me through. And she said, but I can't, because I'm kind of afraid about how people will look at me. I'm kind of afraid about what others will think. And I needed to hear that, because if you are here today and that's how you're feeling, that's a conviction. That's something that you need to set free, and I want you to be freed from it, because if God has done something in your life, throw your hands up, honor him, glorify him, praise him the way you feel comfortable praising him. Dance like David danced if that's what you need to do. I mean, I don't want anyone sitting here feeling like they cannot praise and be set free in a way that their heart and that gripping of Jesus causes them to be set free. Because if you're concerned about what the other person will think, or if the other person tells you not to do something, pray for your brother, pray for your sister, because maybe that's something in them that needs to be broken off, and they need to be set free from it. So sorry about that. On the other side, I'm not saying I'm not sorry. On the other side, we have Michal. We're going to do a little south today. We have Michal who's prideful. We have Michal who's standing there and she's prideful. She's feeling privileged. She's feeling entitled. So she doesn't like how things are going. So is that you today? Are you sitting here feeling you're a little too privileged? You're feeling entitled. The world owes you something. I want you to have a heart check. Are you being selfish? We're all selfish. Everybody's selfish, right? How selfish are we being? Are we putting others' needs first? Are we putting our needs before other people? Are we prideful? Are we walking around with status, thinking, I'm in this school, I'm in that school, I'm doing this, my occupation's going to be this, and I'm going to go here, and are we only concerned about what the world sees our social life looking like? Who are we really living for? What are we really trying to accomplish? So if you're here today and I have stepped on your toes, I'm glad, because you need to be set free from that. And if you're here today and you're wondering if you have one foot in the world and one foot in the Word, I want you to make the decision today to come up here and get prayer. There will be several of us standing up here today, and I want you to get prayer for that. If you're feeling convicted of anything, I want you to come up here and get prayer, get freedom. We don't have forever. We don't have, there's tomorrow, oh, there's this day, oh, there's that day. And while my birthday was just yesterday, it's still bittersweet, because no more than 3 weeks, a little less than 3 weeks after my birthday came, my best friend died in a car accident. So we don't have forever, and she's very young. She's a mother of 5. We have today, because today is a gift, and that's what we have today. So if you are struggling with one foot in the world and one foot in the Word, and you're feeling like you cannot be set free, or you just can't go there, ask yourself, could this be the reason that you are not dancing the way David danced? Because if that's you today, I want you to come up, and I want you to get set free, and I want you to be changed, and I want you to experience what that's like to not go back. We shouldn't be worrying about what social media thinks about us. We shouldn't be worrying about what kind of car we drive and what this and what that. We should just be in the presence of our Father and living our life after what He is desiring for us.